Most people care about doing good. I learned that from juries. You can take a case and present it to a jury, to 12 people who don't know anything about either party and who have nothing to gain or lose from the outcome. And if you're a lawyer, after you give them the case, they will take that case back into the jury room and deliberate, sometimes for hours. And I know this because I'm out there in the hall pacing back and forth worrying about what they're going to do. And sometimes for days they will stay back there. 12 American citizens, plucked from the community with nothing to gain or lose, spend hours and sometimes days just trying to get it right. Juries care and people care about doing good. We're especially blessed to live in a country where that is especially true. Americans, on a per capita basis and an absolute basis, give more money to charity every year than almost any country in the world. We give well in quantity, but it needs to be done well. We need to not only give, as we already do, but to give well. And I'll explain later what I mean by that, but it applies to juries too. No jury, however conscientious, no matter how hard they think about it, no matter how long they argue about it, can come back with the correct verdict if the lawyers don't give them the evidence. Without the evidence, without that knowledge, no jury can get it right. So it is with giving. Americans give, and that is good. But we should also give well and think about how we do it. In order to give well, I think we have to open our eyes. It's a tendency of all people sometimes to see just what's around us and to forget what is beyond, as though it didn't exist. Someone once asked Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player, about a restaurant there in town, and he said, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded." And I thought about that, and I think it's pretty funny too, and I tried to think why he might come to say such a thing. And what I believe it is that when Yogi said nobody, he was thinking that everyone to him was his family and the people that he knew well and close, and to him that was everybody. So if his family and his friends weren't going to the restaurant, then to him, nobody was going. When in fact, he'd not seen past that. He had not opened his eyes to the crowd that was already there. If we are not only to give, but to give well, we have to open our eyes to the crowd beyond where we are right now. Most of y'all probably know my mom, Susan Langford. She has been doing charity work for as long as I have been alive. In Columbus, when I was growing up, it was mostly with a home for disadvantaged girls called the Ann Elizabeth Shepherd Home, and she's done different things, different points in her life. It's different things now, but always she has tried to give and make the world a better place, and it was in hopes that I could maybe do just a little bit of that last Christmas I took off and went to India, went to a place called Jaipur, and that's what that first word is. Mom was just asking me how to pronounce that. I thought I might embarrass her. I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" And she looked at me, and I said, "Okay, I know. I'm just kidding." But anyway, it's Jaipur. And went over there teaching English. That's not what I thought I would be doing. When I went, I didn't really know. I thought I might be building houses, or doing something like that. But it turns out it was teaching English in this small schoolhouse. This is some of the young boys and girls about to eat lunch in the schoolhouse that was tiny, tiny. I'm trying to think how many times it would fit in this sanctuary, and it's hard even to say. It's probably, in terms of square footage, a little bit less than the choir area over there. So it's really small. It's got this concrete floor, these mortar walls. It's got a flat tin roof with some area between the mortar wall and the start of the tin roof where it can breathe. But this is where the kids come to learn as best they can from people like me who go over there, and sometimes to eat. I wanted to show you a few slides of some of the students. This in the front left is Mamta. She was, I guess maybe you're not supposed to have favorites. I don't know. I've never been a teacher. I had a favorite. This was her. She was very temperamental. One day she'd be as sweet as she could be, and the next moment even she's fighting with someone. But she was so vivacious, so alive, so happy when she was happy, that she was a joy to have in your classroom or to be around. This is Patami. She was a very, very good student, very serious, worked hard, always wore the same coat every day. Most of them would have one or at most two sets of clothes. And here she's in a drawing project. This next one is me in what I started calling my teacher hat, trying to teach shapes. The English that I'm able to teach and their level is very basic. So we're trying to teach rectangles, ovals, stars, and hearts here, and underline each syllable so we can teach how to pronounce it. Here we are in a park. Our last day there, we took our girls' class, this is average age of 12 probably, to a park, which is about a half-mile away. And that's kind of a big deal. I wouldn't have thought it was a big deal to go to a park, but for them it is. Most of them don't get out of the slum very often. And even getting them there was difficult because we have like 20 kids and 5 volunteers, and traffic in India is crazy. There's people driving everywhere. Y'all might have seen it in movies or whatever. But getting them there without getting anybody lost or hit by a car was feat enough. We got there, had a great time, and the girls very much enjoyed stealing my hat. This slide is Narti, who is another one of my favorites. She is a troublemaker, but she has a great smile, and when you have that rare moment when she decides she wanted to pay attention in class, she could learn really well and really fast. What she's doing here is that drawing project, and it was one of the last things that we did with these kids is we gave this group of girls, age about 12, some paper and some frames, said you can draw anything you want. And almost every one of them drew a house. Not a slum house like they lived in, not a house that shares walls and tin roofs and where the sewage runs right down the middle of the street. They drew square houses with triangle roofs, just like American kids would draw. But they also drew some other things that American kids did not draw. They drew little water spigots with blue coming out of them and candles. So after they had drawn these things, we had each girl stand up and describe what she had drawn and tell us why. And the same things kept coming up over and over again. The little water spigots were water fountains, they called them, because they don't have running water. I hadn't really thought about that, but they don't have any running water, so that was like a dream, to be able to turn on a tap and have water come out of it. Now, the candles that they had drawn, I thought I understood that from my girlfriend and mom and sisters. I was like, hey, girls like candles. I know that. I know what this is about. Scented candles from Bed Bath Beyond or whatever it is. But that wasn't it at all. That wasn't it for these girls. They wanted candles so they could see at night because they got no electricity, no money for batteries. So candles to them meant something very different. It is interesting to think about the issues in their daily lives and to compare them to our own. When we in the States are worried about our beverages, it's whether or not we're going to sell cans of beer on Sunday. For them, it's whether they're going to have access to fresh water. The magnitude of the problems that we face here and that some people face in the developing world, such as in India, is astounding. And I think it opens our eyes. This is a picture from a train window, and you can see, I've been looking forward to using this laser pointer, it's going to be fun. You can see these little patties up here, little brown patties that are actually made by the water buffalo over here. So the water buffalo's excrement, they'll take the dung from the water buffalo and pat it into a patty just a little bit bigger than a hand, leave it in the sun to dry, and then sell it. And the reason you can sell a dried cake of dung is that people use it for cooking fuel, because that's all they got. There's no gas in the stove, not even enough wood for everybody to burn, so they're using animal dung to cook with, because it's the best alternative that there is. And you might imagine this leads to conditions in a house where dung is being burned that are less than sanitary. This is the schoolyard at the school where I taught. This is the entire schoolyard that we're looking at here. This is where the kids come to throw a ball or jump rope or something like that. You can see there's not much space. This is also their restroom, because with no running water, you have to go to the bathroom somewhere. So they slip around out here and do it out here, which is the same place that they have to play. Not because they're dirty kids and just don't care. It's their only alternative. So it is tempting to look at all of that, to look at the crushing need that some people in the developing world live in and day out, and not just back away a little bit and say it's too big, there's nothing I can do about it, so I'll just get on with my life. I think it's an understandable reaction. It is also a common one because the problems are huge. This is another slum in India. You can see they get massive. And obviously it's not just India. Sub-Saharan Africa has massive problems with famine and desertification. Eastern Europe, massive problems with famine and human trafficking. It's all over the world that there are people who experience everyday crushing need that we cannot imagine. But there are some things that we can do about it. I think that giving now is more effective than it ever has been. There are people smarter than me who try to figure out a way to take a small bit of money and have a huge impact, doing the greatest they can for the greatest number, the greatest good for the greatest number. For instance, the number one killer of any disease in the whole world is malaria. And as y'all probably know, that's transmitted by mosquitoes. The reason it's such a problem in the developing world is that they don't live in houses that can keep out mosquitoes. Can y'all still hear me in the back if I walk around? They don't live in houses that can keep out mosquitoes. So you lay there at night asleep and constantly you're getting bit by mosquitoes. So what's the solution to this problem? Thousands and thousands of people are dying from it. The solution is pretty simple. It's a mosquito net. So there's a foundation now called Against Malaria Foundation. And what they do is they distribute what they call LLINs, that is long-lasting insecticidal nets. And it's just massively effective. In places where the Against Malaria Foundation has gone in to do their work, you have health rates soaring, malaria rates dropping rapidly. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And it's also as efficient as it can be. This net that kid's sitting under in the picture costs $3. $3 US for the net. Then you got to distribute it, you got to get it to where you want to go. That's another couple of bucks. So you're looking at about $5 to get a net in the hand of someone who needs it. It's a wonderfully efficient charity. And of course, that's not the only thing you can do. Another huge problem in the developing world is trachoma, which is a bacterial disease of the eyes. You get it in unsanitary conditions when bacteria get into your eye and it'll start to fog over like you see in the picture. And most people in the developing world contract it when they're young from flies or from having to live in a house where people are burning dung for cooking fuel, and then they're blind by the time they become adults. But it's easy to cure. For about $20, you can perform a surgery and cure someone of trachoma. $20, and the blind can see again. And the people doing that are right here in Georgia. It's the Carter Foundation of the Carter Center. There's one outfit who's putting that together. So the options are out there, and they're wonderful. And there are great ways that we can help people. But one has to keep in mind, when Americans give, and Americans do give, when we give, we need to give well, because efficiency matters. We talked about $20 to cure trachoma, to take someone from blindness to being able to see it again. Well, there's other charities that do different things. There are others that will train and provide seeing eye dogs. And you would think, well, that's a good thing, and I would think that too. But once you take a dog and you train it, and then you train the human to work with the dog, and then you provide recurring training as is needed for the dog, you're looking at $40,000 for a seeing eye dog for a blind person. And seeing eye dogs are great. I don't mean to take anything away from them. But if I, as someone who wants to do something good, have a choice between a $40,000 seeing eye dog, or if you do the math, that works out to 2,000 people cured of trachoma, I got to choose option B. It's important not only to give, but to give well, because you magnify your effect 2,000 times. It is not the size of the sacrifice that we make that matters. It is the magnitude of our effect. And by giving well, we magnify that effect by factors of thousands sometimes. There are lots of charities out there that don't really sometimes seem to think about how well they use money. If you wanted to make a tax-deductible donation, for instance, you could give it, if you wanted, to the Planes of Fame Air Museum, because they're trying to restore an old jet that someone in California considers historic. And I'm not saying he shouldn't do that. He wants to restore a jet, that's fine. But he ain't going to do it with the money that I donate to charity. You can buy $100 is what they've suggested on this website. I know a little about airplanes. That's like 2 bolts on this plane. And with that, you're talking about 5 people who are blind but could see, or 33 mosquito nets. The next question might be, okay, Butler, you could stand up there and tell me you've heard of some good ones, and that's great, but how do I know? How can I figure out if the causes that I want to give to, which charities are good and which are not? Well, the resources are out there, and that's what makes now such an exciting time, is that it is easier than ever before to figure out what you want to do with the money that you give to charity. There's an organization called GiveWell, and this is them up on the screen. They'll rate charities. You can figure out what your area of interest is, and then find out what charities in that area do a good job at taking your money and doing the most with it that they possibly can. Or, if you don't particularly care about the cause, you can just pick their top 3. This is a screenshot from their webpage, and their number 1 there is the Against Malaria Foundation. That's the mosquito nets. The Carter Center I looked up too, and it doesn't make the top 3, which is no big deal. They rate thousands and thousands of charities. But they say good things about the Carter Center and the trachoma nets too. This is their web address. I know from my mom that not everyone is really down with the internet, so I printed off some handouts that basically show this, and they're out there in the back as you walk out. I think I set them on a table. I think it's to the right, might be left. I don't have a real good memory. I don't know, but it's out there. Now, some people look at this and think, okay, that's fine. Why should I give money to something abroad, to mosquito nets in Africa, or to trachoma in Africa, or to something in South America, when we got problems right here? And the answer, I think, well, it's going to be twofold, and I just thought of something, so that's going to be threefold. Number 1, we ought to strive, I think, to do the greatest good for the greatest number. And if you want to do that, most of the time, you're giving abroad. A couple of reasons for that. 1, your dollar just goes further. One day in India, I bought this bowl of street food for lunch. It was pretty cheap, but it was a good enough lunch. It cost 35 rupees, which I put it in a little calculator before I came down here, equates to about 58 cents. You ain't buying no lunch in the U.S. for 58 cents. Your money goes further. And the problems are much more severe. Here in the United States, the poor people in the United States have a problem with obesity. Now, that's a serious problem. It's a food quality problem. I don't mean to demean it, but it is a historical oddity. Here, those who are impoverished have a problem with eating too much. In India, in Africa, in South America, Eastern Europe, it's quite the opposite. There, the problem is starvation. And I say that to make this point. Problems in the United States simply, on average, are not as grave as they are in the developing world. So most of the time, if you strive to do the greatest good for the greatest number, you're giving abroad. The second response to the idea that, no, the hesitation to give outside the United States, I think, is that we ought to believe, I think, that all lives have the same value. And I thought about a way to make that point, and I think that the Bible does it for us. I think the good book and the story of the Good Samaritan, probably the best known story out of the Bible, tells us that. We all know the story, the historical underpinning, I think, is really interesting. You have Jesus telling the story, and of course, Jesus is a Jew. And he's telling it to Jews. He's talking about a Jew who's walking down the road, gets robbed, left on the side of the road. And the person coming along, a couple people pass, as we know, and the person coming along who helps them is a Samaritan. Now, the interesting point about that Jesus' audience would have known, but that we have to learn, is that the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along. I mean, these people are not buddies. It's like some people in the U.S. and some fundamentalist Muslims today. These are not groups of people that you see hanging out at the club. But it is the Samaritan, Jesus says, who stops and who renders aid when others have refused to do so. And I think he tells that story for two reasons. First, it is important to give. Second, it doesn't matter who you give to. The second reason, I think we ought to be comfortable giving abroad. And the third, we just sang. If we're looking to answer the question as to whether all lives have equal value, we could have just listened to ourselves. We said a few minutes ago, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Every color, every race are all covered by his grace. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Some folks, if you talk about giving well, that normally means giving money to a charity that knows how to use it. What I did, in retrospect, was massively inefficient. I had to pay my own airfare to go to India to teach English for a week. And that helps some. If learning English helps the girls in the slum get a leg up in the world, maybe they're a little closer to being on even footing with the other girls in the community, but not much closer. It doesn't do much. It would have been far better, frankly, to do the greatest good for the greatest number if I had stayed home and donated my airfare to someone who knew how to use it, someone like Against Malaria or the Carter Center. So, Bryson's kind introduction aside, I'm no shining example of what one ought to do. One ought to give well, and in retrospect, I'm not sure that I did. But we can. And that's the exciting thing about GiveWell.org and the Against Malaria Foundation and the Carter Center. We're able now to magnify our effect so that we can do the greatest good for the greatest number, so that we can give that $20 to cure someone of trachoma rather than $20 to pay for 1/2000th of the cost of a seeing eye dog. That's giving well. People sometimes say, well, that's just money. You should give your heart and your time. Well, frankly, this is Mamta again, and that's not what she needs. She doesn't need some American who can walk around back home and say, I spent a week in a slum in India. What she needs is a real education and a healthy place to live. And the way to provide that is by donating to people who know how to do it. The way to do that is to give well. And to remember that it is not the size of the sacrifice we make that counts. It is the magnitude of our effect when it comes to giving to those in need. It is not the thought that counts. We as Americans already give more than just about anyone else, and that is good. Now we should take the next step and give well. Thank you.